This is a controversial take. Even though the Jets are very likely to pick a quarterback in the first round of the 2026 draft, it would be encouraging. And yes, impressive if they went in a different direction. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, November 12th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Today, we have our weekly mailbag. Each Wednesday, we try and do a mailbag with listener questions. We'll talk about how the Jets have a solid young core along the offensive line, which is thriving right now. We'll also take a look at the quarterback position. We'll discuss whether Justin Fields' performance against the Cleveland Browns on Sunday was really as bad as people are making it out to be. And we'll talk about whether or not the Jets should draft a quarterback in the 2026 draft in the first round. And that's where we will begin. Our first question. John, the Jets have an abundance of resources over the next few off seasons. We are likely to have a new quarterback at some point. I've been very impressed with Muji and would like to see him pick the next quarterback. Do you think he will have the ability to pass on a quarterback this year if he doesn't like any? Or is this the situation where Woody steps in and forces a quarterback pick? And that's really a question that will define the offseason for the New York Jets. Now, I think it's very likely the Jets are going to pick a quarterback next spring in the first round. And a big part of that is that's just what teams in the Jets situation do. You know, you have a relatively new coach, you have a relatively new front office. There's an obsession in the NFL when you're new on the job with getting your own quarterback, with bringing in your own guy you can develop. And sometimes that's counterproductive thinking. The question is whether Woody Johnson's going to step in. The Jets are not going to have a lot of buzz unless they pick a quarterback in the first round heading into 2026. The Jets just traded 2 of their 3 genuine star players away, which, and if you watch the game from home Sunday, you could see that the crowd did not seem to have the normal amount of energy there. We can argue whether or not the trades of Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams were the right move for the long term of the team. And I think there are some compelling arguments to say the answer is yes, they were the right moves. But it's clear that you take a short-term hit when you take 2 of your 3 best players off the team. And this was already a team lacking buzz. So the question is, will Woody Johnson step in and dictate to Glenn and Muji that you have to pick a quarterback? And that's been known to happen in the NFL. That there have been times where it's been documented where the owner said, you have to take a quarterback. I think one of the things that's alarming for Jets fans is you never know when Woody Johnson's going to step in. He's become very, very erratic. So even though it kind of seems like he's in the background right now, he may, you never know when he's going to start making orders, when he's going to start telling the people running the team that they have to do something. Now, I don't think it's necessarily the case that if the Jets draft a quarterback, it's something that Woody Johnson demanded, because there's a very plausible path that Glenn and Muji just really might like one of the prospects. They might say, we have a high first round pick. We've got good pieces. We've got enough assets to build around the quarterback. This makes sense. And I'll say this. I'm not as opposed to drafting a quarterback as I was before the trade deadline, because after the trade deadline, with all these extra picks coming in, I now think the Jets do have the resources necessary to build a proper infrastructure around the quarterback. This is a bit of resource reallocation where the Jets had some pretty good pieces to anchor their defense, and those pieces are now gone. They've turned into draft picks, but with all the picks the Jets have over the next 2 years in the first and second rounds, they now have an opportunity to build a really good infrastructure that's been lacking around the quarterback. Now, question is, do they have the right coaching staff? That's an open question. We'll talk more about Tanner Engstrand in a little bit. And I think the kindest interpretation you can have of Tanner Engstrand is that the jury is still out on him, and that he's a young coordinator who's still kind of trying to find his way, who maybe can grow into the job. But I think that the Jets are in a position where it'll be interesting to see what they do. And the other thing I'd say is, if they don't pick a quarterback, That's a really good sign, because that is a sign. That's a definitive sign that Woody Johnson is not involved with any of the football operations right now, at least for the time being. And Woody's always lurking. You never know when some losing streak's going to send Woody into meddle with everything. So that's when you're a Jets fan right now. That's just part of the equation. Is that there's always the potential for Woody Johnson to go in and destroy everything. Even when you're making progress. Say what you will about Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas. I don't know how things would have turned out if Woody Johnson had stayed out of football operations. I don't know how things would have turned out if Woody Johnson, didn't do everything he did, dictating all the moves that they made around Aaron Rodgers. But Saleh and Douglas did have the team moving in the right direction. They did have a good core of young players. They had just drafted the offensive rookie of the year and defensive rookie of the year. They had just had a great draft class. They just improved their win total by 3 games. And then Woody Johnson stepped in the 2023 offseason and destroyed everything. That's always a risk there. But if the Jets pass on a quarterback this spring, that's a sign that they're not worried about buzz. That's a sign that they're worried about building things up. Could they do that? I mean, absolutely. I mean, you're going into a year in 2027, a draft in 2027, where you're going to have 3 first-round picks. So not only will you have extra picks, if you want to build around the quarterback, if you want to move up for a quarterback, you've got all the resources that you need. So proper team building, you could definitely make a case that the Jets can wait for 2027, that there's going to be opportunities available to them. And I think part of this is I'm still early in the process, so I mean, my mind could change on this. This 2026 draft class at quarterback does not impress me all that much. I guess the guy everybody's talking about is Mendoza from Indiana. It's not that I dislike Mendoza. I think he's got some good tools, but I don't know that I'd bet a high first-round pick on him. And I think this might be the type of year where you see this happen often, where there's maybe not a quarterback who can justify a first-round draft slot, but some team gets desperate and they think they have to draft a quarterback really high. And that happened a few years back with Kenny Pickett when the Steelers drafted him. That's what happened when the Colts drafted Anthony Richardson. Sometimes a team gets into a position where they think we have to draft a quarterback. The Jets should not be in that position, because the Jets have every opportunity to build a quality core. They have an opportunity to build a quality team right now and make sure that if they wait till 2027, the team that's waiting for the quarterback is ready to go and ready to support the quarterback. When you draft a quarterback, I think the mistake teams make is they think that the quarterback is the savior. They think the quarterback's going to lift the franchise. That only comes in time. That only comes a couple of years into the quarterback's career. Early, the first couple of years, the team has to support the quarterback as much as the quarterback supports the team. So I think that if I were the Jets, personally, if I'm looking at this quarterback class right now, looking at the risk some of these prospects have, my goal would be to trade down and stockpile even more picks and just keep building this roster up, make this a really good roster, and make sure that you're in a position where whenever you draft a quarterback, you've got a really, really good set of pieces around him, and that'll give him a real shot, because I think we've seen over and over with the Jets where they're not giving these quarterbacks a legitimate shot. Too often with the Jets, the quarterback is drafted to save the franchise. For once, the Jets are in a position to help lift up a young quarterback before he lifts the franchise up. Now, here in the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about a quarterback who's not lifting the franchise up, and that is Justin Fields. Fields really struggled once again on Sunday against the Cleveland Browns. Is it as bad as people are making it out to be, though? I'll let you know as we continue here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. As the days get shorter and the nights come earlier, it can start to feel a little heavier, especially when life is already packed with work, family, and everything else. This season, it's so important to reach out and check in with friends, family, or even yourself. Just like checking in on a teammate or reconnecting with someone you haven't seen in a while can lift your spirits, reaching out for therapy can make a real difference too. BetterHelp makes that first step easier by connecting you with a licensed therapist online from wherever you are. You might notice that simply talking things through, even for a few minutes, helps clear your head and get you back on track. Therapy is not just for when things are falling apart. It's about staying balanced and growing through tough seasons. BetterHelp matches you with a therapist who fits your needs, and you can switch anytime if it's not the right match. Over 5 million people have used BetterHelp, and with 30,000 therapists available, finding support is really just a few clicks away. This month, don't wait to reach out. Whether you're checking in on a friend or reaching out to a therapist yourself, BetterHelp makes it simple to take that first step. Listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Because taking that step toward support might leave you wondering, why didn't I do this sooner? Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On the number one sports podcast network. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today we're doing our weekly mailbag. Our next question comes from Neil, who writes, John, can you give a more detailed explanation of Justin Fields' play from game to game? Merely stating he had another horrible game without context is superficial reporting. I went back and watched every play on offense from the Browns game, and while the stats say he had a bad game, the game plan, play calling, penalties, and a lack of execution also paint a vivid picture of the offensive problems. The Jets only called 15 pass plays for the game. Fields was getting the ball out of his hands, scrambling when possible, and throwing checkdowns when pressure was in his face. The play calling was dubious, and the receivers were not getting any separation. What more could he have done? I'm not saying Justin was perfect, because he wasn't, but give the guy some credit for making the most out of a bad situation. Well, first of all, thank you for holding me accountable. But I think that there's a real danger in setting the bar too low for Justin Fields. And I think that, there's a temptation to say because it wasn't as big of a disaster as it was against Denver when he took 9 sacks, that it was a positive. I mean, I think it's very difficult to look at that game where, Justin Fields barely has 50 yards passing, where he doesn't complete a pass more than 5 yards down the field and say it's not bad because it's not as bad as it was against Denver or Carolina. I mean, there's no way you can put up that stat line and have played well. There's no way you can play a game and not complete a pass more than 5 yards down the field and say that it was anything other than really bad. He threw a terrible interception where he looks like he lost track of a player in the middle of the field. But I mean, there were plays where he left stuff on the field. There were a couple times where he bailed on a pocket too early, and there was a receiver who you could have gotten the ball to. And one of the things that's become clear with Justin Fields is that he's a talented runner, but he's not a talented rusher. And this is something I don't think I appreciated before he came to the Jets. What I mean by that is when Fields is tucked in and run and he's in the open field, he's explosive, but he doesn't pick his spots all that well. I mean, there have been lots of situations through the early part of the season where he had a running lane and he just didn't take it. I mean, there was one, the last drive against the Pittsburgh Steelers on the 4th down play where he just should have tucked the ball and run it. And he would have picked it up. Instead, he threw a pass that was incomplete to Garrett Wilson. That's been an ongoing theme through the year. I think against Cleveland, there were a couple of plays where, if he just been a little bit more patient in the pocket, there would have been a window that was opening up for him to throw the ball. I mean, there was another play on a 3rd down to John Mechie where if he puts the ball on the money, Mechie's going to have a chance to turn up the field and pick up the 1st down. Instead, he threw the ball low and away, forced Mechie to kind of go low to catch it, and there was really no chance to convert it. So I really don't know how you could look at that game and come away feeling good about the way Justin Fields performed. I'm not saying Justin Fields is the only problem with the offense. And it's one of the things like I go through is when I point out other problems with the offense, people act like I'm absolving Justin Fields. And when I criticize Justin Fields, people act like I'm absolving the other parts of the offense. I mean, I think that there are lots of problems with the Jets offense. The quarterback play is clearly near the top of that list. I mean, Justin Fields has not been good enough this season. Justin Fields has not been close to being good enough this season. And I think, again, like the fact that performance, I mean, he was 6 of 11 for 54 yards and he threw an interception. The fact that we're talking about the fact that could even be conceived as not a disaster shows how low Fields set the bar. I mean, Next Gen Stats has this stat completion percentage over expected. So they use all this advanced data to try and figure out what your completion percentage should be. And they compare it with what it is. I mean, Justin Fields' completion percentage over expected was negative 7.9. So his completion percentage, based on the passes he threw, based on the data that Next Gen Stats has, it should have been 8% higher. It's very, very difficult for me to conceive of a way that the game was a positive for Fields. And look, I don't think the play calling was good, but you know what I did see? I did see a lot of rollouts. I saw a lot of play action. I saw a lot of opportunities for Fields to use his legs. I mean, that's been one of the big complaints about Tanner Engstrand so far. And look, I don't like the job Tanner Engstrand has done. And a big part of this is like every game I see something that has nothing to do with Justin Fields that makes no sense as part of the Jets game plan. And, in this game, it was the use of Breece Hall where, Hall only got the ball 6 times in the first 27 plays and only had 1 target, which he happened to turn into a touchdown. So you want to get on the play calling. I agree with you, but I can't really absolve Fields from what happened because he was a huge problem in this game. And I think that suggesting that he wasn't, again, might be setting the bar a little bit too low for Justin because that's just not a good enough performance. And I think one of the big problems with Fields through his career is that his bad games have just been like unplayable. He's been unplayable. You want your bad games to be games where you're still doing good stuff, where the offense can still occasionally move the ball, where you're still making plays, even if you're missing throws, even if you're making mistakes. You want it to be like, a game where there's some positives. And when Justin Fields plays poorly, there are no positives. I don't know what plays in that game reflected well on Justin Fields. There were some plays where the Jets didn't execute, where maybe you say that wasn't his fault. But there were, I'm really struggling to come up with any plays that Justin Fields made in that game. He did really nothing to help the offense. So I stand by saying he played horribly because I struggle to come up with how you could watch that game or watch the film and say that he didn't play horribly. Next question comes from Dan, who writes, John, assuming it won't cost much in terms of draft capital, what are your thoughts on potentially bringing in Kyler Murray at quarterback? I would almost certainly say no to that. His contract is not a good contract. I'm not sure it's going to cost nothing in terms of draft capital either, because there's always some desperate team out there that thinks they can take a young quarterback and fix him. That's the Jets and Justin Fields this year is a good example. In theory, I could maybe buy it in a different scenario for the Jets, but I think another thing with Murray is that you're going to have to get him with a team that will tailor its offense in a very specific way, because with Murray's ability to run, and also I think with his lack of height, where I think some of his issues just come from him having trouble seeing over the offensive line, you're going to need to run a very specific type of system if you're going to have success with him. And I haven't really seen Tanner Engstrand tailor his offense in that way this year. And that's one of my issues with Engstrand is I don't know if the offense could have succeeded with Justin Fields, even if Engstrand was running the stuff that in theory could unlock Fields, because they really have at many points gotten away from designed quarterback runs. This is not an offense where you're seeing a lot of run pass options, which Fields was good at running at Ohio State and, had some degree of success running with the Bears, during his most promising moments. It seems like Tanner Engstrand in many ways has kind of brought an offense that's similar to the one that they ran with Jared Goff in Detroit. At least that's my perception. Maybe others view it differently. So I haven't really seen Engstrand be an offensive coordinator who could tailor his offense to a quarterback with a different type of skill set from what they were running in Detroit. So I would really hesitate to bring Kyler Murray in. Now, I don't mind the idea of like trying to find a guy who's maybe a talented quarterback who's down on his luck. Essentially what the Jets tried to do with Fields, where even though it isn't working, I think there is something to be said for trying to find that guy who's kind of like a reclamation project and trying to build him up. But if the Jets are going to continue with this particular coaching staff, I think it's going to have to be more of a traditional pocket passer. And, if it's a pocket passer with mobility, then that's fine. But, Murray is a guy because, again, I think a lot of it's just because he's not tall. I think that you have to run a fairly unconventional offense to make it work with him. And the other thing is, I think there's just such a quarterback shortage in the NFL that if there's like if there's a quarterback who's had any degree of success like Kyler Murray's had, because Kyler Murray may not have lived up to his number one pick draft pedigree, but he's still been a functional starter in this league for most of his career. And he's shown flashes of the ability to play at a really high level. So I think there will be a market for Kyler Murray this offseason. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Sometimes markets don't emerge the way I'm expecting. Sometimes markets do emerge for players in ways I'm not expecting. But if I had to guess right now, I would guess that Kyler Murray is probably going to have some sort of market this offseason. And I really wouldn't. I don't think I would take him unless he came practically for free. I mean, I think even day 2 picks are not something I'd be willing to give up for Kyler Murray. I think we're talking like late day 3 pick, maybe in that situation, if I could rework the contract. There's always a price, but for me, the price would be really, really cheap, probably cheaper than is plausible. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention from quarterback to the guys blocking for the quarterback. Jets offensive line, it's got some young pieces that could potentially support a young quarterback if the Jets draft them in 2026. We'll talk about how they're doing as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Supply House. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Need parts fast for a project? Supply House has next-day delivery. Talk about a game changer. The part finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs where every detail matters. And their Trademaster perks like priority shipping and dedicated support make the whole process smoother. Join the free Trademaster program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHNFL5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you could even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Looking ahead to Thursday Night Football, the Jets are heading to Foxborough to take on the Patriots, and the line has moved in New England's direction. The Patriots were, at the start of the week, 10.5-point favorites. They are now 12.5-point home favorites against the Jets. People are not impressed with the Jets' 2-game winning streak. The Patriots are playing great football. Well, if you want to get in on the action, FanDuel's the place to do it. Again, right now, FanDuel's giving customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Wednesday, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. Our next question, John, any talk about our young offensive line? It appears that we have a nice young core of 3 guys we can build around. What's your take on how they performed against these elite pass rushers, especially last week? I think that there is a lot of good you can say about the pieces on this Jets offensive line. I don't think that this line is fully built yet, but I'm very encouraged by some of the individual performances. I think Armand Member, he's as close to being a guy you can say is a success as is possible 9 games into his career. I mean, I think right now I'm more confident than I thought I'd be at this point that Armand Member is going to be a long-term pillar at right tackle for the Jets. I thought he played well against Cleveland. I think he's had a season that's exceeded all expectations. I thought that he would need some seasoning. I thought there would be more growing pains than we've seen, but Armand Member, he looks like a real keeper at the right tackle position. I don't think Olu Fashanu's quite as far along as Member, which is kind of funny to say because Olu's in the second season and Member's a rookie. I think he's been inconsistent. I think you've seen real positive signs, but you also have to remember that this is a position where, Member aside, there tends to be a very long developmental runway. If you get a guy like Armand Member who, looks real plug and play, that's a bonus, but that's not the most typical path for tackles. Usually it does take a couple of years of experience. NFL offenses are now so different from what they run in college in terms of how you block. And there's also just a huge talent gap between college pass rushers and NFL pass rushers. I like where Olu is right now. I think that he's on a promising trajectory where you're seeing, and you've seen this the last couple of weeks, you're seeing the quality, you're seeing signs that he can play. You're seeing really encouraging things from him. And I thought he played well against Cleveland. He only gave up the 1 sack to Myles Garrett. And there has to be kind of an asterisk next to that sack because that came on a rollout where the Jets were rolling away from Garrett. Now, you may say, well, they were rolling away from Garrett and he still allowed a sack. That's bad. But the rollout, has the quarterback kind of drift backwards as he's on the move. And that creates a really tough angle to block at because essentially Garrett can get much wider there. And the Jets kind of like messed up the blocking on the front side and Fields maybe held onto the ball for a little bit too long. So it made life really easy for Myles Garrett. On a normal play, if Garrett drifted that far up the field, if Fields just took a normal drop, Garrett would end up like on the New Jersey Turnpike. He wouldn't be anywhere near the play. So with that in context, I thought Fashanu played well. Tippmann, I thought Tippmann was okay against Cleveland. I have to say I want to say this the right way. I've been a little disappointed with how Tippmann's played this year because I thought he had the skill set to succeed more at guard than center. And he's just been okay. I don't think he's been as good at guard as he was at center. So, that my whole theory about maybe Tippmann's better off at guard seems like it might be wrong. The Jets may be better off with Tippmann at center because I think he played at a higher level last year in the middle than he has at guard this year. I don't think he's been horrible at guard, but I think he's shown that maybe he's more of a center than he is a guard. And that creates like an interesting dilemma for the Jets this offseason because John Simpson's set to be a free agent and Simpson has not had a good year. Like, I don't know whether it's the new system. I don't know what it is. I really liked the way Simpson played in 2024. In fact, one of the few bright spots on the team when the Jets brought him in as a free agent from Baltimore. I don't think he's had a good year at all. I think his blitz recognition has been kind of shaky. I actually wonder how much Fashanu's struggles have had to do, and when Fashanu struggles because he's been up and down, I wonder how much it's been due to having Simpson next to him. Because sometimes like a guard who's not playing well can impact the way a tackle plays. And Elijah Vera Tucker's also a free agent. So if you move Tippmann back to center, you have two guard spots to fill, and that complicates things. Now, Josh Myers, who's playing center for the Jets, is also a free agent. He'll be an easier guy to re-sign, though. And it'll be easier to re-sign Josh Myers than it will be to find two guards. So, even though Tippmann may not be maximized at guard, you might be better off with Myers at center and Tippmann at guard, or it might be easier to fill in your offensive line that way. Myers is like the classic guy where if he's like the second or third best guy in your offensive line's probably not going to be any good. Whereas if he's the fifth best guy in your offensive line is going to be really good. But overall, look, we've got a lot of really promising pieces on this offensive line, and if we're talking about drafting a quarterback next year, that's something that matters. That's something that's important. That the offensive line may not be fully built, but it's not the disaster it was like during the Sam Darnold days. Some of the other really tough moments where the Jets have struggled on the offensive line. So there are things to like there about what the Jets have. Jets have three good pieces to build around, and Myers is okay. I think I'm more positive on the Jets offensive line than I am negative, and that's something I haven't been able to say a lot through the history of this podcast. Our next question from Taylor. John, I don't think any of us expect to go on a sudden winning streak, but have the last few weeks alleviated some of the early concerns about Aaron Glenn and his staff. I do like how things seem to be stabilizing on defense and special teams, but I am sick of yet another year of an embarrassing offense. What are your thoughts? My number one thought is that any idea that Glenn and this coaching staff and this front office were going to be one and done are now completely gone. I never thought it was going to happen, but like through those first 7 weeks, it felt like every game recap show I kept saying, I don't think it's going to happen, but the odds just rose a little bit. I think the odds are now at 0. This is not going to be the type of disaster year that it would require for the Jets to decide to make a coaching change after one season. And I think the fact that the Jets traded 2 of their 3 best players for draft picks and half the return comes 2 years down the line, that suggests that these guys are going to be around here for quite a while. I don't think you trade 2 of your 3 best players if you're worried about your immediate job status. I certainly don't think you take half the return in draft picks 2 years down the line if you're worried about your immediate job status. I also don't think the owner allows you to trade your best players if he's thinking about making a change. Now, with Woody Johnson, you never know. But I think clearly these guys are going to be here for the long haul. I still have concerns about this coaching staff. Look, they're 2-7. They haven't proven anything. I'm still not sold on Darren Muji. I know Muji's the man of the hour right now in the Jets fan base for getting all those draft picks for Sauce Gardner and Quinnen Williams. I thought this through, and I think you'd have to go back to Terry Bradway to find a Jets GM who was not anointed a genius in year one. Mike Tannenbaum was the next great guy when he drafted Brickenshaw Ferguson and Nick Mangold. Everybody forgets this. John Idzik was a genius in 2013. The Jets were supposed to have the worst team in the league. They went 8-8. Everybody loved John Idzik. He drafted Sheldon Richardson, the rookie of the year. Mike McCagnon had that big first year. Joe Douglas got all the media hype. So very easy to be crowned the next great GM in year one with the Jets. The question is what you do to build going forward. I think there are questions with the coordinators, but some things that I like is that you're starting to see some things clean up. You're starting to see some things improve. I think the defense has been better since the disaster of the first couple of weeks. I still have questions about Engstrand. I'm not totally sold on this offense at this point in time. But, it seems like the Jets are just playing at a more professional level. One of my complaints through the first couple of weeks of the season was just the lack of professionalism. You've seen that go away. You've just seen smarter, more solid play. I like the way Aaron Glenn managed the game against Cincinnati. He didn't care if the Jets had missed 2-point conversion and lost the game. Everybody would have criticized Glenn. Nobody's giving him credit for his game management winning the game. When the Jets got that 2-point conversion, they put themselves in the position where they could win the game with a touchdown rather than send it to overtime. And the other thing is, I remember the first couple weeks of the season, one of the things that, I said, was really concerning was that none of the guys the Jets brought in were playing well. That's changed. I mean, Brandon Stevens is now playing at a really high level. And we talked all offseason about how Brandon Stevens was really kind of a referendum. It's one of those important players because it was a guy they saw something in that wasn't obvious from watching Stevens play in Baltimore. And Stevens is playing well. I think some of the draft picks, some of the young guys they're playing have shown potential. I'm not going to make it have to be like a 2022 draft class where you had both rookies of the year, but you're starting to see signs of growth from guys like Malachi Moore. The Jawan Briggs, who they brought in, has played at a pretty good level. So you're starting to see improvement. You're starting to see signs of competence. I'm not ready to crown these guys as like the coaching staff and the front office who are going to lead the Jets out of the wilderness. But I think that things are clearly better than they were a couple of weeks ago, and there's clearly more room for encouragement than there was a couple of weeks ago. And of course, we can talk about the trade, which say what you will about the trades, you can like them or dislike them. There's a clear plan in place, and that's one of the things that's really important for a first-year regime is to show that there's a clear plan in place, that they are going to rebuild this team around draft picks and young players, and they have stockpiled them. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you learn from this episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow with Crossover Thursday to get you ready for Thursday Night Football, Jets and Patriots.